My name is Dina Al-Mahdi. I'm assistant professor at the British University in Egypt, and I'm an alumni graduate from 3GPA program 2022. And it's a pleasure to moderate this roundtable where we have a lot of professional speakers on board, and we will share some questions related to how to rethink design education through the continent. We have 6 distinguished speakers. We start with Killion Benjamin from Rwanda, followed by Killion Mokwete from Botswana, Mohammed Uttara from Burkina Faso, Issa Diabaté from West Africa, Marwa Dabaieh from Egypt, and Omar Degan from Somalia. We will start like fast 2-minute presentation for each speaker, and then we have to run for the questions. And I can ask the audience to write down their the name of the panelists who want to share the questions for. So Killion Benjamin from Rwanda, he's a director of the African Design Center. Killion has taught at the Architecture School of Kigali Institute of Science and Technology. Besides, he shared in the design project of the Expo in 2010 in the Netherlands Pavilion. So please welcome with Killion.
Thanks, Dina. 2 minutes is an awful short of amount of time, so I'll try to be brief as much as I can. I don't think I'm going to need to use slides to introduce myself, but to sum up what we think is necessary to do for us to transform education on the continent, or to try a movement that changes what's being taught. We're doing 2 things. One thing is to try to lead by example, build a practice that is based on the theories and principles that we advocate for that change to happen. And that includes rethinking the purpose of architecture. At our practice, we live by the mantra that design can never be neutral, that it either helps or it hurts, and we should be intentional about deploying architecture, design, capabilities to only create a body of work that heals our communities, our individual health, and our planet. And it will be impossible to convince our youth that they need to change and learn how to do these type of things if we do not show the way and build successful, sustainable practices that show that there is prospect for prosperity in that line of work. So that's what we set out to do. We set out to build a practice, a sustainable practice that does lighthouse projects, that's how we refer to them, that can demonstrate that every excuse you can throw at this problem and pretend that those are reasons why things cannot be done properly, there are ways that we can go around them and be successful and build sustainable businesses and practice good architecture the way I think everybody in this forum really want us to do. So because of that, what we're trying to achieve is to make sure that we design projects that are impactful, that are efficient, that are healthy, and that we really understand the composition and the source of what makes our buildings when they're built, both in terms of materials and skills that builds it and the people that build them. So that like when you start tackling things like individual health and community health and planetary health, that our profession is actually like playing a role on the entire spectrum. And then once we do that, then we set out platform and systems that allows us to support young professionals coming to the profession, not to be sucked into this like manufacturer-led movement of architecture that seem to be the predominant force in the market, and to support them to start their career with an orientation that at least can allow them to start thinking about doing project, deploying their creativity to do architectural projects that are aligned with this type of philosophy. I'll stop there and then I can expand on it if there are specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for keeping on time. We move after this to Killion Mokwete from Botswana. Mokwete is an associate professor from Northwestern University from Boston. Mokwete is a UK trained and registered architect at RIBA and also a co-founder of the nonprofit community-based design firm titled Adaptive. He has many practice experience in design with mass design group. So, Professor Killion, you can start sharing your.
Unmute myself. Well, thank you, Dina. I'm gonna share. Well, before I actually share my slides, I should just correct that I teach at Northeastern University, so not Northwestern University, in Boston. So that's a slight correction. I'm gonna share a few quick slides. I know I have like 2 minutes on here, but I think what I wanted to let me know if you can see the slides. Can you all see the slides?
Yes,
no.
It's clear. Yes, we can see the slide, and also the notes on the side.
So I'm gonna try and. Can you see the slide now without the notes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, so I think what I wanted to maybe put forward is 3 points or 3 themes of discussion on the subject of rethinking design education. And if I may say as well, I think you will find that the question of design education and architecture is not only an African issue right now. I think there's a whole lot of discussion even in the global south, the West, that education is probably not currently fit for purpose. So I would like to discuss only 3 themes. I think there are a lot more themes that could be discussed, and I think the theme of context, access, and opportunity. Context, more so on what is the context within which architects need to be educated in both Africa and the world, really. I think, and again, I could talk about positive asset framing kind of thing, but I think going right to some of the key issues that we face in much of Africa, which is a whole lot of our citizens still reside in slum conditions or conditions that are not conducive for really healthy habitation, right? And I think design and architecture specifically, we have the tools and the means to participate in solutions. We can't solve all the problems that are found in some of these conditions, but I think we could lead in equipping students and coming out of university with the right tools and mindsets to engage in this conversation. So I think that's an important context to frame the rethinking of education. That's not the only, but I think that could, for us, could be one of the major contexts. And again, I want to stress that slums are not only an African problem; they're a global problem, as you can see in that map. But for us, we have to find design education solutions that can help us address this context. And I think the question of rethinking design, I think, can also apply to how is it that we can teach design, not as in how we have, some of us have been taught outside the African continent, how we've been taught outside Africa, but from a pedagogy that can actually address some of those systemic issues that I just showed in the previous slide. And I think there are a few models out there that can be experimented with. I'm glad that Christian is here at ADC. They're experimenting with, not experimenting, actually doing practice-based practical education models that can actually embed our students and embed our education in the actual issues that we face through practice-based learning models. There are other approaches that I think could be much more relative to the issues that we're facing, which is, applying design thinking models. I think those can really get to the kind of core systemic issues that we face. And I think we could also do a lot more in formalizing and diversifying pathways for, architectural graduates. I still think again, are probably lecturing here, that we're producing a whole lot more architects as in degree holders, but there's a whole lot more under the frame of the built environment where we can allow different pathways to emerge and be licensed too, rather than just be pathways that are not necessarily licensed. And one of the other issues that I think could be central to rethinking design education is addressing the question of access. I think for all the students of architecture, you all know this, that architectural education is very expensive. I think that barrier to entry is something that remains a big roadblock for diversifying the profession, rather than having it as something that only a few can access. But I think beyond the cost, there are other issues that we really have to tackle. I think a lot of students can go into profession based on influences they've had. I think we are not doing much more to put forward role models, to put forward, to make architecture accessible to even the child in the village who does not know what an architect does. I think there's a lot more we could do to make architecture more accessible to everyone. And I think lastly, I think the idea of opportunity. I use this image here not to pick on anyone, but I think from an African context, I think the idea of enabling once you've graduated from architecture, can we all have fair shot at the opportunities that Africa presents? And I'm not insisting here that we should be protecting this kind of economy, but I think being very deliberate about some of these opportunities that can offer growth for young architects coming out of school is something that we have probably will take more of us to advocate for governments and others to make sure that these kind of mega projects and mega opportunities, they actually are also made available for smaller firms in Africa that could actually play a role. And I think that could go a long way in making sure that architecture, there's not a ceiling from which we cannot go beyond. And that's it. I think that should be 2 minutes, right, Dina?
Almost, yeah. Thank you so much. And you raised some issues related to the equality of the type of education that we provide in schools. So I think we will have more discussion in the question part. Thank you so much. Okay, now for the next speaker, Mohammed Uttara from Burkina Faso. He's a designer, painter, artist, and a sculptor. He has using a lot of things related to recycling furniture and with very primary colors. And as we will see here in his presentation, the innovative and responsive, how he used waste product made from different resources in his region. So Hamid will be speaking in French, and Rahma will translate his if there's any questions related to his part. So Hamid, you can start.
Ok. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci de me donner cette opportunité de pouvoir m'exprimer ici pour ce forum. Je suis actuellement aux États-Unis, à New York précisément, où je suis venu pour une exposition et en même temps, je suis en contact avec des galeries pour des futurs projets. Voilà. Donc, je laisse traduire ou comment faire?
Je pense oui, ça va peut-être être plus facile de traduire en attendant. I guess he said that he was introducing himself and said that he was currently in the US, États-Unis, c'est ça?
Oui, c'est ça, ouais, à New York.
In New York for a expo.
Ok, donc disons que c'est encore une autre opportunité de présenter rapidement. Je vais partager avec vous ce que j'ai préparé pour ce forum. Voilà.
It's a great opportunity to be in this panel and to be able to share what I have and share my knowledge with you guys.
Voilà, donc je sais pas, j'espère que je vais y arriver. Euh, voilà. Voilà, donc je suis en train de charger. Bon, je vais continuer à parler en attendant. Disons, je suis le fondateur du studio Ouattara, basé spécialement à Ouagadougou. Et voilà, à Ouagadougou, au Burkina Faso. Voilà, donc je suis. Attends, l'écran ne vient pas, je ne sais pas pourquoi.
Est-ce que ça marche?
Oui, c'est en train de tourner. J'attends. Je vais.
I guess just a little bit of a wait maybe for.
Je vais essayer autre chose.
I think we have,
Excusez, Mohammed, nous pouvons
Oui.
partager ton présentation si c'est possible.
Oh, il n'y a pas de souci. Allons-y. Je vais arrêter le mien. Comme ça, c'est mieux.
D'accord. Dina,
Je
if you
n'arrive plus à
would be
quitter.
able to share the screen for Hamid with his presentation.
Je n'arrive pas à lancer la vidéo. Bon, je vais continuer.
Je vais partager.
D'accord, ok.
Ah bon?
Ok, donc c'est parti. Voilà. Voilà, merci beaucoup. Donc, je disais tout à l'heure, je suis le studio Ouattara, je suis le fondateur. J'ai été créé il y a plus de. En fait, moi, je suis dans le métier, je suis dans le terrain. Ça fait déjà bien longtemps. Et 25 ans, peut-être plus même, mais ça fait peut-être une bonne vingtaine d'années que j'ai lancé le studio Ouattara à Ouagadougou, précisément au Burkina Faso. Voilà. Donc, où je réside également.
Ahmed,
Voilà.
je pense que
Oui.
c'est peut-être un peu plus facile pour les autres si après chaque phrase ou phrase et demie, je commence à traduire comme ça.
Il n'y a pas de souci, ça marche.
Okay. So just to reiterate what Hamid just said, he's the founder of the Ouattara studio located in Ouagadougou, and he's been working, well, he created the studio about 5 years ago and been working on it ever since.
Voilà. Ok, donc disons, c'est toujours le studio, en fait, l'idée du studio, c'est toujours essayer c'est mon idée principale était à la limite d'utiliser tous les matériaux qu'on trouve sur place, hein, pour donner encore vie à ces matériaux qui sont un peu partout dans la ville, parce que le Burkina Faso est un pays enclavé, donc il y a beaucoup de produits qui viennent avec ces emballages-là.
So the idea was really to use, make sure to use the waste because, I'm sorry. So the idea was really to use the waste in Burkina Faso because that was things that you could easily find, especially all the like packaging and so on.
Voilà, donc aujourd'hui, je suis, après toutes ces années de pratique, l'idée aussi était également aussi de prouver qu'à travers l'art aussi, on peut créer aussi des emplois en utilisant ces matériaux-là, ce qui était quand même un défi par rapport à déjà le fait qu'on vit dans un milieu où on ne comprend pas forcément ce que nous faisons. Et donc, pour moi, c'était un défi déjà de pouvoir installer ce studio et d'ouvrir un atelier de fabrication en utilisant ces emballages-là. et en même temps répondre aussi aux sceptiques qui pensent qu'on ne peut pas utiliser, on ne peut pas retravailler, en tout cas donner une force à ces emballages-là pour montrer autre chose, voilà, un autre visage de l'Afrique.
Although it's a challenge to work with some of these materials, the fact that it was readily available also created jobs, and my job was really to reimagine how these packaging could be reused as a new material.
Voilà. Et en même temps aussi, je voulais aussi montrer aussi mon imagination un peu souvent débordant, qui a envie également aussi de montrer de très bels objets, mais juste en utilisant ces emballages-là, mais en m'inspirant vraiment des valeurs et puis de la culture locale et du travail du métal, dont avaient vraiment une connaissance, j'allais dire mes ancêtres. Donc j'avais envie de mettre ça au bout du jour, vraiment.
And it was really important for me to integrate my values and my culture, and really also integrate my ancestry into the work I do.
Et une chose aussi est de signaler, c'est qu'il y avait aussi un besoin d'accompagner aussi des jeunes qui avaient besoin de formation. Il y a vraiment un problème lié à la formation, à l'enseignement. Le Burkina Faso n'ayant pas d'école d'art, n'ayant pas en fait aucune structure en fait normale qui enseigne les arts en général. Et donc mon studio a permis, ou disons, moi j'ai essayé de faire ce que je peux pour essayer de donner une force, disons, une possibilité à ces jeunes-là de pouvoir maîtriser un peu la matière, les choses autour d'eux. Donc, il y a véritablement un changement de paradigme qu'il faut opérer, dont j'ai énuméré ici, en 6 points, c'est-à-dire c'est d'essayer déjà de voir déjà ce qui est fait et ce qui n'est pas encore fait, d'évaluer, de diagnostiquer, mais aussi, il faut aussi introduire aussi en deuxième partie, je pense qu'il faut aussi introduire aussi à l'école primaire, dès le bas âge, pour changer, dès le bas âge, en tout cas les fondements, les bases, en tout cas des différentes techniques, des différents métiers, et bien sûr investir à fond, investir à fond vraiment dans les métiers, en fait, dans les métiers.
Another thing that was really another thing that was really important to me was to inspire the youth, and along with creating jobs, we're really inspiring the youth, and that could be started at a very young age, and showing just in general the youth in the country, like exposing them to the arts and the crafts, and inspiring them to join and participate in this.
Voilà, donc investir massivement vraiment dans ce secteur-là, parce qu'il y a beaucoup à faire, il y a beaucoup de jeunes qui sont désœuvrés, et donc le studio avait vraiment envie de participer à cela. Mais aussi, il y a aussi un aspect aussi dont j'ai attiré l'attention sur le fait que aujourd'hui, Internet est là, et la télévision également aussi à travers Internet. Il serait intéressant de pouvoir élaborer des programmes artistiques adaptés à chaque endroit pour peut-être passer des possibilités aux jeunes de connaître davantage aussi le milieu. Ça, c'est vraiment la vision de SHO, essayer de faire quelque chose pour l'entourage à travers l'art, mais également aussi le studio aussi est un maillon sur lequel aussi utiliser l'art aussi pour sensibiliser, vu qu'aujourd'hui au Burkina Faso et puis dans toute la sous-région d'ailleurs, nous sommes confrontés à cette problématique du terrorisme et tout ça, donc j'ai pensé que l'art aussi peut aussi faire quelque chose. Et donc j'ai lancé un concept qui s'appelle résistance artistique. Donc vous avez vu les photos à côté, où j'ai mes mains un peu tendues pour bloquer un peu ce phénomène à travers notre culture et notre voilà.
Sorry. So just to recapitulate the last bit, so although internet and TV now is readily available and people can get, kids can get inspired by that, it's still very important to install some of these values and really also using art as a tool and as a tool of expression, and then also using art to gather people and translate your message. Go ahead, Dina.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mohammed. And now we move to Issa Diabaté from West Africa. He is an architect and co-founder and managing director of Kofi and Diabaté Group. Diabaté has led a number of local initiatives that deal with African urban issues and addresses also the context-oriented problems. So, Issa, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing architect, actually. I live in Côte d'Ivoire. I've been working for about 27 years now here after graduating from Yale. And actually, I think the subject is a major issue because I realized that after 27 years of practice, I spent practically 17 practicing architecture in a very traditional way, and the remaining 10 years to unlearn what I had learned in school in order to relearn something that is more adapted to the context. So I think that context is something of a major issue. Education of architecture is very different, whether you're in Europe or in Africa. I mean, the issues and the challenges are absolutely different. And to illustrate that, I'll just start a little story. In 2012, I was leading a group of young architects, and we went into one of the informal settlements of Abidjan, and thinking that we could sort of replan the place and rethink the spaces. And what we get back from the inhabitants were that first of all, they didn't ask for anything, and second of all, that we were not fit to actually rethink their architecture, for very basic reasons. We didn't know about their sociology, we didn't know about their culture, and we didn't know about their needs. And what they wanted us to do really was to be a link between government and themselves. So this is like very important in redefining the role of the architect. It's not about designing objects, but it's also about designing relationships. It's putting the thinking that we use when we're doing work, when we're planning a house, to sort of rethink the entire ecosystem, to sort of have actions that actually do have an impact on our direct surrounding. So, of course, that sort of led to a number of reflections, and one being that in our office at Kofi and Diabaté, we figured out, around that time that maybe it was very difficult to act on government using, traditional means, talking to them. And maybe we had to sort of rethink a way of maybe producing something that makes a difference. So we decided to become developers. Developers, not to maybe expand the range of what we do, but mainly to test novel ways of doing architecture, and especially urbanism in our environments. What are the issues that are very important when we're designing? How do we take into account the fact that things are moving very, very fast in countries where you have exponential growth in terms of population. What is true 1 year is not true, in the next 2 years. How do we put that in the context of academic education? Very difficult, because by the time you're finished doing your research, I mean, the conclusions are already obsolete. So thinking about all those issues, I think it's very important to maybe tackle the subject slightly differently. Maybe a little bit on the march of regular academic context, but I think that the role for the architect is to also think about education, about architecture, in a larger sense. with young architects and actually young population of Abidjan, we've tried to think about those issues and how do we put them together and how do we make sense of them in a way that is actually quite practical. We came up with this small collective, called Baby Thinkers, with whom we've tried to think about those issues, especially revolving around urbanism and about urban issues and about how do we build, a sound urban environment for our African environments. And maybe I'd like to share with you maybe 2 minutes of a small film to illustrate that. If I can just share my screen. Hold on 1 second. Can you see?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. So the main goal of this video is to illustrate how we could recompose cities and how we could actually go through urbanism, taking into account the very, very important items that we need to have in sound development, including things such as, not only local development, but using the green as a connector, like vegetation, everything that has to do with greenery. Also expanding in the idea that we also need to work at a regional scale as opposed to maybe a cell cell-like scale. And moving into regional scale, we should integrate or incorporate notions of nature, notions of natural parks, notions of resources, notions of energy. And if we do so as we develop, we will not have to fear phenomenons like demographic growth. We would not have to fear the fact that our cities are becoming too dense. We will not have to fear the problems linked to the energy, transportation, density, and all of that. So maybe the challenge is to rethink the deployment of urbanism slightly differently in a more flexible and resilient way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this interesting presentation. I think we move to Dr. Marwa Dabaieh. She's from Egypt and associate professor at the Environmental and Sustainable Architecture at Malmö University in Sweden now. Dr. Marwa has been practicing architecture and dealing with a lot of vernacular architecture cases during her career, besides doing a lot of hands-on workshops and projects. Dr. Marwa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dina. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you all today. In the coming few minutes, I will share part of my experience in education and practice using, as Dina kindly mentioned, hands-on methods and introducing vernacular and traditional techniques using natural building materials to students in architecture and also to the communities. And we try together to do like DIY solutions for environmentally conscious architecture. So if I could share my screen. Here we go. Yeah, so I start by showing you some examples for like how I try to introduce some of those hands-on concepts to students, especially using natural materials with focus on earthen construction techniques stemmed from the traditional way of construction in Egypt. I teach both in Egypt and in Sweden. Also, I taught in Denmark, as I've been like in different teaching and academic positions, apart from like my practice as an architect. Yeah, I as if I wrote a contract with myself like 20 years back, promising that I will not use concrete, steel, or any industrial material. I will only commit to using natural materials, whatever natural material that is available in the context that I work with. So I try to introduce that to students. It's very hard because all what they see around is just concrete jungles everywhere. Which is the common norm, and this is becoming like the conventional way of design and construction. To be able to introduce this kind of techniques to students, it's a little bit of a challenge because first of all, we don't have the craftsmanship anymore. There is almost hard to find like building codes and building regulations in many parts of the world that support using natural materials in design and construction. So I try to bring it to class if it's possible, that we bring the material, and I'll try to construct some small models so they can feel and touch and smell the material and then understand their properties. I try also to introduce some of the low-tech and passive solutions. Even this. I'm sorry, someone has to unmute. Yes. Yeah, thank you so much. So, and whenever it's possible, we can go in real life and try with local communities also to build and construct some demo models. And Dina actually was one of this experimental work. We did it together in Egypt. And on campus, we also try to teach students how to use even recycled materials in different ways, so they can understand the properties, they understand the construction methods, and how they can use very minimalistic low-tech approaches in order to construct passive and low-tech solutions for hot climate. I also conduct several workshops for practitioners, for children, for students, in order to introduce the same ideas of these hands-on techniques. Here you can see like different shots from workshops using earth, techniques like Adobe or rammed earth, and also using reeds. We tried to use like pottery vessels as one way of construction. Here, when it comes to involving local communities in design and construction for passive and low-tech methods, that's an example from St. Catherine in Egypt, using trompe holes as a retrofitting solution for both passive heating and cooling. Normally, trompe holes are used for heating, but here in this example, we used it for heating and cooling. And it actually managed to reduce 90% of the heating loads that is needed, 70% of the cooling loads that is needed, and 90% for the heating loads that's needed in this area. And it's all done with a very low-tech methods, and also involving the local community in the whole process of the especially for the construction part. Yeah, and here's the local community. We're also trained on how to use the system after the implementation, so they can go on and implement it on their own. Here's for a workshop with my students in Denmark, where they also were introduced to several low-tech approaches, using also traditional techniques from Denmark, using reeds, straw, seaweeds, clay, in different constellations, and we try to do it for contemporary use. So how that can be done for modern houses. Another example from Sweden. That was a refugee house that was constructed with the help of a group of refugees. After the Arab Springs, there were a flux of refugees coming from Syria. So they were also introduced to some of the techniques that could be used now and also we call it like build back, when they had the opportunity to go back to their home countries, so they can use the time in hosting countries to learn techniques that they can adopt in their back home. So they learn the know-how and they can adjust it according to the available local materials in the local context. So it's a kind of a training also for them. Yeah, I think that was it for me. So it's basically what I was trying to show you is how we can start from architecture education, introducing this kind of concepts to students who will be the future practitioner architects, and at the same time introducing also these concepts to local communities that we can together support each other and help each other in understanding the value of using local and natural materials in design and construction. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the presentation and the different topics from different even cultures. So I think it's important to highlight on the importance of how we allow the students to feel, touch, and smell the materials. So thank you. Now we are moving to Omar Degan from Somalia. Omar is an architect and principal of the EO Architecture Group. He is specialized in emergency architecture and post-conflict reconstruction of Somalia, focusing on identity, cultural identity, and sense of belonging. So, Omar, you can share your presentation.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to go straight to the presentation, trying to be as quick as possible. 40 seconds each slide, basically. Okay, can you all see it, I guess?
Yes, it's clear.
Yeah, so just to be quick, we are an architecture office that was born in the Horn of Africa, in Somalia, in the capital city of Somalia, but then we opened to the world and kind of share my time between this triangular sort of basic. But one important thing is that what we do, and so we work in all those contexts that we call right now, those fragile contexts where there are problems, let's say, or issues of different nature, and where the communities are less served, and promoting peace and development where possible, and working in a strict contact with communities, and trying to not to be too much architects, but more listener in a sense. So try to impose less and guide more in that sense. One important thing of our office, or like the philosophy behind our office, is cultural identity. And this is like an extremely important thing, especially considering the times that we're living in, where whoever is diverse, whoever dressed differently, eat different food, has a different religion, race, or whatever it is, in the last decades become something to fear, something to kind of like eradicate slowly from the society. And this appear clear to me when we look at architecture around the world. That is getting more and more flattering during time. So what we trying to do, and I always use these declaration of the UNESCO that in 2001 basically say that as much as biodiversity, it is important to preserve our cultural diversity, because it's exactly in our diversity there is the beauty of our world. And I think that this is extremely important for us while working, especially when we work in those fragile contexts, from conflict to internal migration, climate change, and and this can be from Somalia all the way to a neighborhood in New York City. And we believe that the most important thing is to understand the community, to understand their heritage, culture, where they belong, the history that is behind that, in order to translate that into an architecture that can become a tool of peace and increase the sense of belonging, especially of those communities that unfortunately during the years didn't have access to the services. Also considering the fact that most of these communities cannot afford services of architects, and I feel like us as a professional, we slowly during time moved more and more away from from the community work and the real meaning of architecture in that sense, and a bit more in the direction of profit, which is understandable, but at the same time, people that can't have access to good architecture become more and more bigger part of the population. So what we do is trying always to translate these needs into a more sustainable, effective architecture. To give an example, we also do working together with a lot of international organizations, which unfortunately most of the time the projects are imposed, and realities that are supposed to be temporary then become permanent, as for refugee camps, but also like for temporary hospitals that then become like a focus of the community. So what we try to do is working together with international organizations and set new limits of architectural frame, because for who of you is not really familiar with that, there are international guidelines that are being imposed. And I use this example because it was an expansion of an hospital, so a maternity ward, and we had a strictly guidelines from the international organization, but then we tried to playing around with them to trying to give a more long-term solution for that. And this considering also that as a maternity ward, this building created dynamics that are quite interesting, because people felt more secure to go to a building that looks a bit more contemporary and new, and that increased also the work of doctors that an NGO managed to employ more people, patient came more, and so also the mortality consequently reduced because more people felt comfortable to go and access to a medical solution. And I think that this was just like to another point to increase the fact that whenever you work with the community, whenever you understand the needs, and whenever you become part of a group, then you can avoid that sort of rejection of the project, and then it create that architect that is a guide and lead the process, and not an architect that impose the process without knowing the consequence of that imposition. I conclude with this. Thank you so much. I think I can stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Omar, for highlighting on one of the most recent problems that we are facing now in our region. So let's start now for some questions. As we saw that most of the presentations highlight the importance of mentioned the education part, and how we how we ensure engaging the community participation and our design process. So my first question is for Christian. We know that the importance of education in practice, however, there's a very big gap between both of them. How do you take the practice with its challenge back to the university to fill this gap?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways that it's been tried to, it's been tried. But I think on the continent, we've seen like very little successes. The most conventional way is obviously like internships that universities insist on, that students spend a lot of times in practices, doing internships. Other universities have the programs that have some amount of money. They take students for travel, they go visit projects in other regions and things like that. I will not claim that I know the answer to that question. If I did, I'll be speaking to all vice chancellors of universities in Africa to tell them what they should be doing. But I think for me, the major thing that is missing is what we're taking back to universities. There seems to be a very big disconnect between the priorities of academia and the priorities of practices. And if we cannot reconcile those differences, then we will always be speaking different languages, because academia seems to be favoring, and very recently, more so, innovation of most of the things that we're talking about here, try to understand how we could change the the way we think about architecture, the way we understand the philosophy behind it, the way we understand it from like a theoretical standpoint, but also like how we can innovate in terms of materials and things like that. And you find that when you get to practices, very few people are interested in actually figuring out how to build businesses that work that way. We're all happy to get big commissions in London and New York and Dubai, and we get stuck in that kind of like offering architecture services as a commodity, because the business of architecture right now is simply built that way. And I think if businesses, if we don't change the way we do it, if we cannot show that it's possible to carry these lessons that the academia is trying to push into sustainable businesses, I think our efforts to go back to universities and to students and encouraging them to work this way will always fall on deaf ears, because the moment our students leave universities, the goalpost for them is to become like the other architects they see around, flying around in private jets and getting decommissioned. So we need to reconcile those differences, in my opinion. And I think businesses, we need to take the lead in creating businesses built on these principles that we preach and we talk about all the time. And then we can prove to the younger students that it's their mission to, take on the mountain and move this forward.
I think nowadays it's important to also highlight that the integration of the marketing and business and even entrepreneurship started to take a big role inside the universities in many places. So I think this is the new generation who will trying to focus on such initiatives. So my second question go for Professor Mokwete. What is the design education from your perspective with the booming in the digital fabrication era that's appearing nowadays?
Was that directed at me? Sorry, I missed the name.
No, I will. My question was, what's the design education from your perspective with the booming and the digital fabrication era that's happening nowadays in the architecture education?
Well, I think for me, design education should have some principles that are not going to be almost like flip-flopping based on what are the tools of the day. Because I see technology, in my view, even in the studios that I teach, I see technology as a tool, especially kind of the modern, technology for making as tools that should make it easier for us to solve problems, right? And I want to also offer why we have to have principles rather than based on kind of innovation of modern tools. For example, we went through a period where sustainability, like the tools that can solve, energy sustainability was a hot thing, and that seems to have faded away. Now we kind of, so I would rather say, instead of looking at what are the current, I know that right now there's talk of 3D printing, which are great innovative tools that can help us solve some of the problems. But I would rather not kind of change our education model based on that, but to say, at the core of what we're trying to teach, what are we trying to solve? And I would like to kind of come back to what most of the speakers here were talking about today. Omar mentioned about, a lot of clients who in areas where architects don't usually, spend time. How can we make sure that the principles of education address those problems that need to be solved, right? And if we have innovative tools or technologies, how can we make sure that, for example, let's use 3D printing. How can 3D printing help us solve challenges of, housing in informal settlements? Or somebody presented earlier on technologies they're using to try and, use mycelium for doing insulation and things like that. How can we use technology and tools to bring those innovations to solve some of the kind of key problems that we have at hand? And I think that's why the question of context context in terms of what are the issues that the African continent face that we architects could play a role in, right? So I would rather move like have us, use this technology and tools to solve the kind of key problems that we face, but around some kind of common principles, if that makes any sense.
Thank you. And I think also this is more about, are we taking the digital technology as a tool or as a trend? So if it's a tool to solve something, I think this could be more successful compared to just a trend. So my question is now for Hamid. So Rahma, I think you can translate the question. Okay. So as a way to save the environment, what are the challenges that you are facing during the recycling comparing to starting a project from scratch?
Du coup, la question, c'est dans une démarche pour sauver l'environnement, quelle est l'utilité d'utiliser des pièces recyclées pour la fabrication au lieu de nouveaux matériaux? Vous êtes toujours muted. Hamed? Ah.
C'est bon. Alors, non, pour la question, comment sauver l'environnement en utilisant les pièces, à mon avis, c'est toujours la même question. C'est que la réponse pour moi, c'est d'abord la jeunesse, il faut leur montrer la voie. Comment réutiliser? Pour mon cas, c'est la réutilisation, c'est pas de recyclage, puisque j'utilise les fûts, les barils pour leur donner une nouvelle direction. De montrer aux jeunes, en fait, comment utiliser leur environnement, ce qu'ils consomment, comment ils peuvent l'utiliser pour réaliser d'autres choses. Donc, comme ça, je pense qu'avec cette habitude qu'on leur inculque très, très, très tôt, ils peuvent avoir ce même geste-là, donc pour contribuer fortement à sauver l'environnement autour de nous. Surtout que l'Afrique est considérée comme aujourd'hui le dépotoir, parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'emballages qui débarquent tous les jours, pour ce qui concerne le Burkina Faso en tout cas, qui est un pays enclavé. Il y a un besoin réel d'inculquer ça aux jeunes, la manière dont ils peuvent utiliser les objets autour d'eux, pour qu'ils puissent grandir et adopter de nouvelles façons, disons, de nouvelles habitudes, en fait. Pour ce qui est des adultes, ça, c'est déjà compliqué. C'est ma façon d'apporter en créant ces objets-là.
So, recycling material is really important. Well, it's really important to use these used materials because it's really a way to show the youth like new habits and really install that from young age. I really show people how to use, well, especially young people, how to use what's in their environment to create instead of looking elsewhere. And this is especially important for Burkina Faso or like African countries in general, since they're sometimes used as like trash collectors. So like a lot of waste will be sent to those countries. And it's really a way for Hamed, I guess, to show this new way of doing things and really install that from the get-go. That's it. Hamed, tu veux...
On peut ajouter, on peut montrer la dernière vidéo, le slideshow, là, s'il vous plaît. La dernière partie, mon slideshow, là, la dernière partie, ça peut peut-être aussi répondre aussi à la question.
Je pense, Dina, is it possible to share the last video of Hamed's presentation?
C'est la dernière partie.
Last slide.
Let me see where Liliane.
Oh.
Non, la dernière, il y a une dernière. Une vidéo qui n'apparaît pas.
Parce que c'est pas...
En fait, on a besoin, il y a une vidéo qui est à gauche, je ne vois pas ça, mais bon. En fait, c'est pour pouvoir j'utilise, il faut savoir que les techniques que moi j'utilise, c'est vraiment une technique qui n'a pas besoin vraiment d'utilisation, beaucoup d'utilisation de machines dont nous n'affectons pas vraiment. J'essaie le moins possible d'affecter l'environnement autour de moi en utilisant énormément d'électricité. Voilà. Donc, l'idée étant que il faut utiliser un peu l'artisanat local et puis les techniques locales pour pouvoir rejoindre. C'est une vidéo, mais ça n'apparaît pas. C'est pas grave. Voilà.
So I guess to add up, the video was just showing an example of how the furniture is made or how he's manipulating the material. And just to add on, saying that how using these traditional way of doing is really part of his work as well.
Thank you so much. I think it's quite interesting to see how the recycled things that we are get rid of are being used in a very modern and contemporary way.